Crowned, tested, and unbroken, Alexander now turned his gaze toward Persia itself, and the man who ruled it, Darius III, King of Kings. He had crossed into Asia with an army a fraction the size of the empire he intended to destroy. Now, in the autumn of 333 BC, Alexander of Macedon stood on the brink of the battle that would decide whether he became history's greatest conqueror, or simply another failed invader crushed beneath the weight of Persian numbers. At Issus, Darius III, King of Kings, ruler of the largest empire the world had ever known, personally commanded a force so vast that ancient historians, prone to exaggeration, claimed it numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Alexander had perhaps 40,000 men. What happened next would not only shatter the myth of Persian invincibility, it would set in motion a campaign of conquest so relentless, so audacious, that within 8 years Alexander would control an empire stretching from Greece to India, becoming Pharaoh of Egypt, King of Persia, and, in the eyes of many of his own soldiers, something dangerously close to a god. This is the story of how one young king brought the mightiest empire on earth to its knees, and how, in the process of conquering everyone else, Alexander began to lose control of himself. By 333 BC, Alexander's campaign through Asia Minor had proceeded with startling momentum. City after city along the coast had fallen or surrendered, and at the legendary city of Gordium, Alexander confronted the famous Gordian knot, an impossibly tangled cord bound to an ancient chariot, which local legend held could only be undone by the future ruler of Asia. Rather than patiently unraveling the knot as countless others had failed to do, Alexander, in a gesture that perfectly captured his character, drew his sword and simply cut it in half. Whether this story is literal fact or later embellishment, it crystallizes something essential about Alexander's approach to every obstacle in his path. When patience and convention failed, he simply forced a solution through sheer decisive action. That same audacious confidence would soon be tested against the full might of the Persian Empire. King Darius III, having initially underestimated the Macedonian threat, personally marched west at the head of an enormous army to crush the invasion once and for all. The two forces converged near the town of Issus, on a narrow coastal plain hemmed in by mountains and sea in what is now southeastern Turkey. Ancient sources dramatically inflated the size of the Persian force. Arrian and other historians cite figures of 600,000 or more, numbers modern historians regard as wildly exaggerated, likely by a factor of 10 or more, given the logistical impossibility of supplying such a force in that terrain. What is certain is that Darius commanded a significantly larger army than Alexander's, bolstered by thousands of Greek mercenary hoplites fighting for Persian gold. Yet Darius made a critical strategic error, choosing to fight on a narrow, cramped battlefield that neutralized his numerical advantage and prevented him from properly deploying his superior cavalry. Alexander, recognizing the opportunity immediately, launched a characteristically bold assault, personally leading the elite companion cavalry in a direct charge aimed not at the broader Persian battle line but at Darius himself, positioned at the center of his forces on an elevated chariot. The psychological calculation was ruthless and brilliant. Ancient battles were often decided less by total casualties than by the collapse of morale, and nothing shattered an army's will to fight faster than the visible flight of its supreme commander. As Alexander's cavalry crashed through the Persian lines toward him, Darius, whether from genuine fear or simple military pragmatism recognizing the battle was lost, turned his chariot and fled the field, abandoning his army, his baggage train, and, in one of the more remarkable footnotes of ancient warfare, his own mother, wife, and children, who were captured by the Macedonians in the aftermath. The Battle of Issus was a catastrophic defeat for Persia and a stunning validation of Alexander's military genius. Just as significantly, Alexander's treatment of the captured Persian royal family revealed a calculated political shrewdness that would become a hallmark of his entire campaign. Rather than humiliating or executing Darius's mother Sisygambes, his wife Statira, and his children, Alexander treated them with conspicuous respect and royal honors, reportedly assuring them that Darius himself was still alive and that they would be treated as royalty deserved. This was not simple mercy, it was strategy. Alexander understood that he was not merely trying to defeat Persia militarily. He intended, eventually, to rule it, and a conqueror who wished to be accepted by Persian elites needed to demonstrate that he respected Persian dignity and custom, not merely Persian territory. Rather than immediately pursuing Darius into the Persian heartland, Alexander made a strategically vital decision to turn south along the Mediterranean coast, methodically eliminating the Persian navy's ports and bases one by one, denying the Persian fleet's safe harbors and effectively neutralizing Persian sea power without ever fighting a major naval battle. Most cities along the Phoenician coast submitted without significant resistance. The great island fortress city of Tyre, however, refused, confident behind its massive walls and its position half a mile offshore, protected by what its citizens believed was an impregnable natural defense. Alexander's response demonstrated both extraordinary engineering ambition and terrifying ruthlessness. Over 7 months, his forces constructed a massive stone and timber causeway extending from the mainland to the island itself, under constant bombardment from Tyrian defenders, eventually breaching the walls in a siege that became one of the most famous in ancient military history. When Tyre finally fell in 332 BC, Alexander's fury at the lengthy, costly resistance manifested in brutal reprisal. Thousands of Tyrians were killed in the final assault, and thousands more, estimates from ancient sources suggest around 30,000, were sold into slavery, a grim continuation of the pattern first established at Thebes. From Tyre, Alexander marched south into Egypt, a province that had chafed under Persian rule for generations and that offered no meaningful resistance to the Macedonian army. The Egyptians, rather than viewing Alexander as a foreign conqueror, largely welcomed him as a liberator from Persian oppression, and the Egyptian priesthood formally crowned him pharaoh, incorporating him into the ancient religious and political traditions of the Nile in a ceremony steeped in millennia of ritual significance. It was in Egypt, in 331 BC, that Alexander founded what would become perhaps his most enduring legacy. The city of Alexandria, strategically positioned on the Mediterranean coast near the Nile Delta. Though Alexander himself would never live to see the city fully built, Alexandria would grow over the following centuries into one of the greatest intellectual and commercial centers of the ancient world, home to the legendary Library of Alexandria and a symbol of the cultural fusion that Alexander's conquests set in motion across 3 continents. While in Egypt, Alexander undertook a grueling, dangerous journey deep into the Libyan desert to consult the oracle of the god Ammonius at the Siwa oasis, a pilgrimage of enormous symbolic significance. The Greeks associated Ammonius with Zeus, and ancient sources report that the oracle's priest greeted Alexander as the son of Zeus, a declaration that Alexander apparently received not as flattering ceremony but as genuine confirmation of his divine parentage, the very belief his mother Olympias had instilled in him since childhood. Whatever precisely was said in that desert sanctuary, the details remain deliberately obscure even in ancient accounts, as Alexander reportedly never fully disclosed what the oracle told him. The visit appears to have profoundly deepened Alexander's private conviction that he was not merely a successful king but a figure of genuinely divine status, a belief that would increasingly strain his relationships with his own Macedonian officers in the years that followed. With Egypt secured and his legend growing, Alexander turned east to finish what he had begun at Issus, the complete destruction of Persian imperial power. Darius, given nearly 2 years to regroup, assembled what ancient sources describe as an even larger force than before, reportedly including scythed chariots and war elephants, and chose to make his stand on the open plain of Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq, deliberately selecting flat terrain where his numerical superiority and superior cavalry could be fully deployed, the exact opposite of the cramped battlefield conditions that had doomed him at Issus. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought in October 331 BC, is widely regarded by military historians as Alexander's tactical masterpiece, a battle in which he was catastrophically outnumbered yet displayed such sophisticated battlefield management that the outcome was scarcely in doubt by the engagement's end. Facing a Persian line that vastly outflanked his own smaller army on both sides, Alexander employed an oblique echelon formation, deliberately drawing Persian cavalry away from the center of Darius's line in pursuit of his own flanking forces, then exploiting the resulting gap with a devastating direct cavalry charge, once again personally leading the companion cavalry, straight at Darius's position. As at Issus, Darius, seeing the charge bearing down on him and his center collapsing, once again turned and fled the battlefield, this time abandoning his empire for good. Persian resistance collapsed in the aftermath, and within weeks, the great imperial capitals of Babylon, Susa, and finally Persepolis itself, the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid Empire, fell into Macedonian hands, yielding treasuries of almost unimaginable wealth that had taken the Persian Empire 2 centuries to accumulate. It was at Persepolis, in the winter of 330 BC, that one of the most controversial episodes of Alexander's entire career occurred. During a night of heavy drinking and celebration, the magnificent royal palace of the Persian kings was burned to the ground. Ancient sources disagree sharply on Alexander's motives and even his sobriety at the time. Some accounts frame it as a calculated political statement, symbolic revenge for the Persian burning of Athens generations earlier during the Greco-Persian Wars. Others, less flatteringly, suggest it was an impulsive act of drunken destruction, possibly incited by the Athenian courtesan Tyre, that Alexander may have regretted almost immediately. Whatever the precise truth, the destruction of Persepolis symbolized, in the starkest possible terms, the definitive end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire that had dominated the ancient world for over 2 centuries. Darius III's own end came not at Alexander's hands but through betrayal by his own satraps. As Alexander pursued the fleeing Persian king eastward across the Iranian plateau in the summer of 330 BC, Darius was seized, imprisoned, and ultimately murdered by his own cousin and satrap, Bessus, who then declared himself the new Persian king. Alexander, arriving too late to capture Darius alive, reportedly discovered the King of Kings dying or already dead, mortally wounded, abandoned in a cart. Alexander is said to have covered Darius's body with his own cloak and arranged a royal funeral befitting the ruler he had spent years pursuing. Another calculated gesture designed to position himself not as a foreign destroyer of Persia, but as the legitimate successor and avenger of its rightful king, a claim that carried enormous political weight as Alexander now moved to consolidate control over the vast Persian territories that had suddenly, astonishingly, become his own. With Darius dead and the Achaemenid Empire formally ended, Alexander increasingly began adopting Persian customs, dress, and court ceremonial, including, most controversially, proskynesis, a Persian practice of ritual prostration before the king that Macedonians and Greeks found deeply offensive, associating it with worship owed only to gods, not mortal rulers. This cultural shift, combined with Alexander's growing embrace of the very Persian aristocracy his army had just conquered, appointing Persian nobles to positions of authority alongside Macedonian officers, created severe and dangerous tension within his own inner circle, tension that would soon erupt into open violence and betrayal among the very companions who had stood beside him since the crossing of the Hellespont. The Persian Empire had fallen, but Alexander's ambition was far from finished, and neither was the toll it would take on the man himself.